Hello and welcome to Foreign Affairs. Welcome to our viewers here in Ghana and around the world. This week, political watchers were stunned by the sudden resurgence of clashes that erupted in Sudan. Khartoum witnessed shelling that claimed at least 15 lives while injuring dozens. Many civilians remain displaced, prompting calls for a global action to secure a lasting ceasefire.
Madam President, allow me to say a few words before the briefings presented by my colleagues. Excellencies, for 10 days, Sudan has been ravaged by a deadly conflict, despite calls for a ceasefire from inside and outside the country. At least 450 people have been killed, including 4 members of the United Nations family. And more than 4,000 people have been injured and tens of thousands have fled their homes. Reports from Khartoum paint a devastating picture. People are trapped indoors, terrified, with dwindling supplies of food, water, medicines and fuel. Health services are near collapse, and according to the World Health Organization, several hospitals are being used by armed groups. Across the country, there are reports of armed clashes. People have fled their homes in Blue Nile and North Kordofan states and across Darfur. Refugees and returnees have arrived in Chad, Egypt and South Sudan, and I thank the governments of those countries for their support. These 10 days of violence and chaos are heartbreaking. A prolonged, full-scale war is unbearable to contemplate. Sudan borders 7 countries, all of which have either been involved in conflict or seen serious civil unrest over the past decade. It is a gateway to the Sahel, where insecurity and political instability are making an already catastrophic humanitarian situation even worse. Across the wider region, poverty and hunger are rampant. The climate emergency, the global cost of living crisis and soaring levels of debt are taking a terrible toll. And in some places, humanitarian aid is all that is keeping famine at bay. The power struggle in Sudan is not only putting that country's future at risk, it's lighting a fuse that could detonate across borders, causing immense suffering for years and setting development back for decades. Excellencies, the fighting must stop immediately. We need an all-out effort for peace. I call on the parties to the conflict, on Generals Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, Hemeti, and the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to silence the guns. It is incumbent on Sudanese leaders to put the interests of their people front and center. This conflict will not and must not be resolved on the battlefield with the bodies of Sudan's people. The Sudanese people have made their wishes very clear. They want peace and the restoration of civilian rule through the transition to democracy. The parties to the conflict must respect the 72-hour ceasefire brokered by the United States and come together to establish a permanent cessation of hostilities. I urge all Council members and other member states and regional organizations with influence to press them to de-escalate tensions and return to the negotiating table immediately. Madam President, Excellencies, I commend our Sudanese and international partners, including several present today, who are working to support peace in Sudan. The United Nations has reconfigured our presence to protect our personnel and their families while staying and delivering support to the Sudanese people. The UN's leadership in Sudan, headed by my Special Representative, Volker Perthes, remains in the country. We are also establishing a hub in Port Sudan to enable us to continue to work with our partners in support of peace and to alleviate humanitarian suffering. 1/3 of Sudan's people needed humanitarian aid even before the recent crisis. That number can only have risen sharply after the destruction of the past 10 days. The United Nations stands with the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and our regional and international partners. Above all, we stand with the Sudanese people and their hopes and demands for peace, the restoration of civilian rule, and the democratic transition. And I thank you.
Ghana's Foreign Affairs Ministry, just as many other countries, joined the fray in carrying out an emergency evacuation plan in a bid to save lives and to prevent any further catastrophe.
We have managed to account for all the students. There are 76 adults and one child. Of the 76, we have 43 males and 33 females, plus one child, making it 77. They have all been accounted for, and we have moved all of them to a safe location outside Khartoum en route to the border of Ethiopia. At the moment, in probably about 2 hours' time, they will be reaching the border town. And then from there, we have consular officers from our mission in Addis Ababa already stationed at this border town, the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. They have started processing the documentation to enable them to get safe passage from Sudan to Ethiopia. And once they enter into Ethiopia country, we will move them from that border place to Addis Ababa. And from Addis Ababa, we intend bringing those who are prepared and willing to come to Ghana. We intend to bring them home. So that is the first batch. The second batch are 3 Ghanaian footballers who, as we speak, are being housed by their football club at a safe place, at a hostel. So that is the situation of the second group. The third group are 2 Ghanaians working for an Australian mining company at the border between Sudan and Egypt. In fact, I think the mining company has a twin brother, or they have a branch in Ghana here. Pesos, I think it's a gold mining company. The 2 Ghanaians are working for them, and they have informed our mission in Egypt, because our mission in Egypt or Cairo has responsibility for Sudan. They have informed them that they have full control of their staff, and that even though the location where they are far away from where the fighting is taking place, they have made all the necessary arrangements that should it become necessary, they will move their staff or evacuate their staff from the Sudanese side of the border to the Egyptian side of the border. So we seem to have everything under control now, and the evacuation exercise is well thought out, well planned, and everything is in place, and we are on course to deliver.
Well, one man has seen it all, spent some time in Khartoum, and is now based in South Sudan, Juba. I'm talking about Dr. Prosper Ni Norte Ado. He's joining us live from there for a conversation on this. Doc, well, it's not a good time to be talking to you knowing what's happening in Sudan. But for many who are not aware about the genesis of this whole conflict, are you able to help us just unpack what's happening now for the average person who's watching us now?
In 2019, there was a revolution that ended up in overthrowing former President al-Bashir. This revolution, which resulted in a coup, had both General al-Burhan and General Dagalo, also called Hemiti, being those who overthrew their former boss, so to speak, because they were all part of the Rapid Support Forces you'll be hearing about, which emerged out of the group called Janjaweed. You would remember the Darfur crisis, and Janjaweed was so much involved in that. And this Rapid Support Forces is a force that was, the force was created under former President al-Bashir to also help him in his security, activities. So the group became very powerful. And at the time, we have the two generals who are fighting currently in charge, General Al Burhan being the leader, and of course, the deputy being General Dagalo. Now, after the revolution in 2019, which I mentioned, we had a brokering of the Juba Peace Agreement sometime in October of 2020. And in that agreement, it was decided that the Sudan Armed Forces has the RSF integrated. And so this integration was supposed to take place at a point in time. Now, during the transition period, there was again a coup, which then overthrew that whole transition process, curtailed the development, and brought in this current military council, still headed by General Al Burhan and deputized by Hemiti. Then what then happened was, as time went on, there became issues of power struggles. But let me throw a bit more light on the dynamics behind this power struggle. You'll notice that President al-Bashir, former President al-Bashir, so to speak, had Islamist leanings, and so ruled in a dictatorial environment and will promote Islamist ideals with the Sharia and all the strictness that goes with it and all. Now, not everybody was in favor of this. So the revolution, to an extent, then promoted democratic ideals and giving the rights to women, to the youth, to be able to express themselves and also be part of decision-making processes and all that. So you would see their heavy participation in that revolution. Fast forward, when the time came for the handing over of the military part of the transitional government under that sovereign council to the civilian, the process was stopped. That's how the coup came in. So the civilian didn't have the chance to lead the government for the rest of the transitional period as agreed. So with these two leaders in power, a time came, they fell out. The falling out basically based on the fact that RSF is supposed to be integrated in the south, but Hemiti, who heads the RSF, wasn't, according to reports, in agreement with this. So one thing led to the other, and there were accusations of somebody beginning, the onslaught, and the other group had to retaliate, and that's where we are currently.
And many were taken aback when we saw the resurgence of shelling in Khartoum. What would you say sparked this latest tension?
So at a point in time, we had so many issues, economic, and it made life quite difficult. We also had other social issues and issues to do with civilian protection. You saw a lot of demonstrations at a point in time with civilians calling for the restoration of civilian rule within the transitional period to end it so they can hold elections. Now, a series of mediation processes were ongoing, including the one we call the trilateral, made up of the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development from the East African Bloc, IGAD, and of course, the UN, represented by UNITAMS in Sudan. So we were at a point where we were expecting that there would be another agreement between both the military and the civilian. Then this whole escalation came up. And reports had it that the RSF brought its troops towards the capital. And so the South had to reinforce and protect where the presidential palace is located, the army headquarters, and a couple of other places, strategic installations like the bridge that joins Omdurman to the Khartoum capital and all those places. Now, with these events unfolding, one is not specifically able to tell why that movement of troops on the side of RSF towards the capital. But it was obviously clear that prior to that development, there were disagreements between the two generals in terms of this integration of forces. And this happens to be the immediate or the triggering, part of the escalation.
Yeah, and a lot of backlash greeting this. The United Nations General Secretary General condemning what's happening in Sudan as we speak. A number of organizations have also joined saying. But what's the focus now has got to do with what seems like a ceasefire that has been brokered in Sudan as we speak. In your estimation, what will it take to sustain a long-lasting peace within Sudan itself? Should it come from outside of Africa, or should we be approaching this through an African solution?
Okay, so on the ceasefire, it was a welcoming development because several had been tried, but was not successful, about 4 or so or more. And so this current one that was called by the US was relatively successful. And it ends as we talk tomorrow, Friday, 28 April. This was supposed to create a humanitarian corridor for people to, seek humanitarian assistance, water, food, medicine. Those who want to also leave the country to leave, either nationals or foreigners, before anything else happens. And you notice that if people are leaving, then it is to say that once they leave, the war must start again. But that's also, of course, not the way to go. So you'd have lots of lives lost in addition to what we have currently, getting to 500, many injuries in the thousands. And so the IGAD bloc had a meeting on the 16th of April and got a mediation committee in place, headed by President Salva Kiir Mayardit of South Sudan, and including President Ruto of the Republic of Kenya and the President of Djibouti, President Gwela. So those three were supposed to be the ones being the regional bloc, going in to mediate and ensure that some calm is restored. But since they were not able to go in there, and yesterday, I think, President Kiir, representing the IGAD, and of course the committee in place, made a call on the two generals, requesting two main things: that the ceasefire be extended another 3 days more, and while doing that, create that humanitarian corridor. And then the second one is that the two of them choose a location of their preference, so talks can be held to see how to find a solution to the crisis. Now, in all these, you notice the AU and other international partners have also added their voice, condemning what was happening and calling for a truce and mediation. So these all factor into this whole attempt to mediate. And as we talk currently, we had General Al-Burhan accepting the two proposals from President Salva Kiir. The first being extension of the ceasefire from 28th of April for another 3 days, and also being ready to hold talks. Currently, as we talk, it appears that or signs are showing there may be talks if they hear from General Dagalo. And if that would take place, General Salva Kiir proposed the venue of Juba, South Sudan, as one of the alternatives, or anywhere they may choose, but within Africa. The second aspect of your question as to if outsiders should be mediating, as you would have heard already, the IGAD is keenly involved. The African Union is here. The international partners are already here, also lending their voices in support to the process. So there'll be no need for brokering this talks or agreement, so to speak, if it takes place outside of the continent.
How about the roadmap? Because there were earlier efforts, of course, that sustained or secured some sort of progress, as many experts were describing it at the time. Given what's happening now, would you say that all of that has been eroded and that you would have to start afresh, given what's happening in Khartoum?
So for the 2020 October Juba Peace Agreement, when the coup happened, the process was truncated. And it had led to several protests with close to 100 or more people losing their lives, unfortunately. So that partnership of both civilian and the military running the country terminated. And following that, it had been the military in charge, with both General Al-Burhan and his deputy MBT running the country. So obviously, things were not working anymore under that agreement because of that coup. And the reason for that coup was because the time came for the civilians to take over and finish the transitional period and organize elections. But the military did not accept that. And so, as we talk currently, the trilateral mechanism I mentioned was in the process of ensuring that some agreement again was reached between the civilian and the military to enable the transition period phase off towards peace and democracy, but it did not happen. So technically, for now, provisions in the Juba disagreement, as we talk, is suspended until perhaps the actors involved now decide to go back to it and resurrect it, or what came after it that were being negotiated is revisited to put the country back on the process towards peace and democracy.
I'll be checking your personal thoughts on what it will take to end this war. But just before we get to that, this whole situation has brought in its wake a number of countries carrying out repatriation or evacuation of many of its nationals. We've seen the U.S. Embassy, for instance, in Khartoum shut down, and many countries are following suit to bring back their nationals home. Is it early days yet, or do you support the humanitarian moves that many of these countries are taking?
It's not early days yet, given that the nature of the crisis in Sudan is fluid, extremely unpredictable. As we talk, there's been some semblance of fighting again around the capital. We are not sure, because it's tomorrow that this is supposed to end entirely. And so people who have the chance to flee must go until the situation is restored. What it would really take for a solution to be found would be first and foremost that even if the agreement is talks take place, at least those needing humanitarian assistance must first and foremost get it. People are in dire need. Can you imagine, interestingly, that if you are caught in that crossfire and one of your relatives, God forbid, dies, you would not even have the chance to go out to bury that person. People don't have water to drink, and some are in need of medicines to treat their wounds and all that. So it's terrible. So that humanitarian aspect is first and foremost and very important. The second aspect of it is that it's always good to just leave properties and preserve your life. So that evacuation you refer to is extremely important, and people have taken advantage of it. I know that some are still yet to do that, but those who can do that must do that because it's extremely important to save their lives. Then the third aspect of it is this, that we would hope that this call for an extended ceasefire still holds. The difficulty is that we haven't heard from General Dagalo, MET, so to speak, and it will be useful so that we also hear from him. Because if you notice, it has been a straight-out war, and one of them want to have power. And so they have been fighting. The good thing, though, is that the general commanding the armed forces of South Sudan has agreed that there can be a ceasefire. And if that is the case, and we have General Dagalo also agreeing, that would be a positive development. But I know that eventually there must be talks. They can't fight forever. And so this must also be an option that must be pursued. It's only dialogue that can resolve this conflict.
Well, I was asking the question because the manner in which, for instance, less developed nations are carrying out the evacuation is beginning to raise some concerns. Here in Ghana, we're asking, for instance, a group of 75 or 76 as they are, to make their way to the Ethiopian border so we can have the evacuation take place. For some, that's as though moving them from danger to even more danger, because we don't know, who's going to be faring for these individuals as they make that perilous journey to the Ethiopian border. It's part of the reasons why I was asking the question as to whether or not the evacuation plan has been implemented by some of these developing countries is the way to go.
Certainly, it has been implemented. I know that several nationals, for instance, have been evacuated from Port Sudan on a Saudi Arabian vessel to Saudi Arabia. I know some whom I've communicated with who are currently in Ethiopia. Some have gone to Egypt. Ghana, for instance, I think headed towards the Egyptian border with South Sudan, because the embassy that has concurrent accreditation, is located in Egypt, and so some have moved there, and others are also trying to evacuate their citizens accordingly. Some are coming down to South Sudan, and others are also proceeding to Chad and all these other places. So yes, evacuation is ongoing. But, it takes time also. And again, the fact that the fighting is going on and you have elements, criminal elements, that are also taking advantage of the situation. Indeed, it can be a worry. But our hope and prayer is that those who are able to make it to the borders will then be able to get some kind of a refuge to protect them.
I see. The African Union has come into sharp focus, giving it a significant role that, of course, it has to play based on the vision, the mission of the organization itself. Some experts are, skeptical about the intervention from the regional, the political organization as we speak. Do you feel that the AU has lost its relevance in trying to secure peace on the continent?
I wouldn't say so. Right from the start of this process, the AU has been engaged and has been working from day one, right after the revolution till now as we speak. You'll notice when the crisis broke out, they made a statement, they called on the generals to stop the fighting. In fact, there was an AU Peace and Security Council meeting for the chairperson of the commission and also the authority to go in there and mediate. But if bullets are flying, it's too dangerous. And of course, also the airspace is not open. How do you go in there? That has always been the problem. And so for mediation purposes, if two people are fighting and you don't have their consent, you find it difficult to intervene unless, you keep engaging and talking until they accept you to come in. So this is how the situation is currently as we talk. And anything IGAD is doing it in consultation with the African Union, the UN, and other international partners. So it's a collective effort, and everyone is concerned about the issue, including the African Union itself.
Right. You're in South Sudan. Juba, where you are, is strategic to, of course, the mediation processes. What would you say are some of the efforts going on there, practically, that could bring this crisis to an end?
The two countries have a common heritage. They were together before they separated in 2011. And if there's a problem in South Sudan, you see the leaders from Sudan coming in to mediate and vice versa. And that's why this is of so much concern to South Sudan as well as a country. And so that being the case, the president, Salva Kiir, is making all the efforts within the context of IGAD, and in consultation, of course, with the AU and other international partners, to get the two, generals to talk. There are indications that in the coming days, there could be talks. What is currently holding that is hearing from General Dagalo, Hemiti. And so if we do hear from him and he accepts, it will be two things. They may decide to come themselves, that is to Juba or wherever else they choose to, or they may send representatives to come for dialogue, for some kind of discussion, hoping that the ceasefire will still be maintained towards resolving the problem. And so these are the current efforts ongoing to find a solution to the problem.
And even as we wrap up on this conversation, the future, we don't know what it holds for us. But I mean, from your personal outlook, what would you say is the reason or grounds you have to say this will surely come to an end someday?
The issue is that you cannot continue to fight forever. People get tired at a point in time. Unless there's constant supply of ammunition and all that, there must be an end somehow. The difficulty is the lives that will be lost and the property. And eventually, the fighting continues. You either destroy each other or somebody emerges as a victim. And the other person then succumbs or submits, which the two are trying to do. So there'll certainly be an end at a point in time. What is needed to bring that about is a constant call and the pressure to stop this war. There may be a need to remind of consequences and implications in the area of war crimes, crimes against humanity and all that, especially when civilian or residential areas are attacked, hospitals and all that. And so these are some of the reasons. And above all, that the common interest or collective interest of both Sudan and South Sudan are at stake. The pipeline runs right from South Sudan through Sudan to the port of Sudan. And this is a very strategic, economic commodity, that oil. And so you can really imagine the implication for South Sudan if this goes on and it becomes a target. There are other crimes ongoing in the country as other militias are taking advantage of the void, and this must stop immediately. And also that the more destruction, the longer it takes to, reconstruct. And so I think that with all these factors, intense engagement, calling on, these actors to stop the fighting would somehow, bring this to an end. And hopefully there can be a way out of this whole discussion. But above all, the target must be that eventually it must be restored to a civilian-led government. It will take time, of course, but certainly that should be the ultimate target.
I thought that would have been the last one, but we can't go without talking about the East African region itself. Quite a lot of flashpoints that we're identifying. Is this of concern to you?
It is, and that should certainly also concern everybody as well. And that is why there's been constant engagement of IGAD and these countries. Surrounding Chad is there. There was a coup after the former president died, his son took over. There are discussions to hold elections. It's still in a state of flux. And then you have, of course, Ethiopia, that border area. Also, when you have the Tigray dispute with the government, TPLF, discussions are ongoing, positive developments. Hopefully, agreements that have been brokered should be consolidated, but this also still poses a problem. And again, you have South Sudan, where transition is ongoing, and because of the umbilical cord between these two countries, everything must be done to stabilize the borders. As more people are coming in, you don't know who is coming with what intention. Right. And so there's lots ongoing, and certainly should be of concern, and solutions found immediately to avoid regional implications.
Indeed. All we hope for is for the best. Dr. Prosper Nino Teado, thank you for joining us from South Sudan, specifically Juba. I'm grateful for your time. Genevieve Partington, thank you for joining us here on Foreign Affairs. And congratulations to your organization. Amnesty International is 50 years old. We'll be talking about the celebration shortly. But we're witnessing what's going on in Sudan. A lot of concerns about the need to respect human rights and to push for it, even as we see this temporary ceasefire. You're equally concerned as an organization about the rights of individuals there, correct?
Yes. We've actually issued an embargo. We actually signed a letter today to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ghana to, prohibit the embargo on Sudan and South Sudan. So it's very important that there's no exchange on illegal arms, and both sides respect the embargo.
I see. Why is Amnesty so big on issues of human rights around the world?
Well, Amnesty is a movement. I always say it's a movement of activists, it's a movement of people who are passionate about human rights. You'll be amazed that we have, just in Ghana, we have about 6,000 members, and around the world we have thousands, hundreds of thousands of members who fight for human rights. And it's not just, it's, fights for civic space, freedom of expression, non-discrimination. We fight against inequality as well. So it covers really all issues regarding human rights, but we really stand on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that is what we live by. And, so we run a lot of activities, especially in Ghana.
Let's talk about what you've been doing in Ghana. And I see that top on the agenda in recent times has got to do with removing, for instance, the death penalty from our law books.
Yes.
Why is that essential for a country such as Ghana?
Yes, so I mean, we've been in moratorium for a long time. We haven't, we do sentence people to death, but we haven't, committed the act. Currently, there are about 100, that was as of 2022, there were 171 persons on death row. This is very significant, and I'm sure you know that they are all being held at Nsawam. The prison conditions are deplorable. Even the feeding allowance for prisoners is 1 cedi 80 pesos currently. Right. We're trying to push governments to, increase that. But also death penalty, I understand that people feel like an eye for an eye, but it's very important that we are creating a system of reform and not just punishment. And I feel like life imprisonment or other forms of sentencing could serve best other than death penalty. There are so many instances where administering the death penalty has gone wrong. Some people have been innocent and they've been, sentenced to death. And also, we've had, for Ghana, it's by hanging, death by hanging if you committed murder or treason. In the States, there's the lethal injection, which, apparently people suffer a lot when they go through that. And it's, I know people say the person's a murderer and things like that, but why don't we consider other forms of punishment?
And that's a question that always stares you in the face as to what the appropriate alternative will be to someone who's committed a heinous crime such as murder. What should we be looking at in terms of the alternatives? Do you have an alternative?
Yes, there's life imprisonment, but there are other alternatives, because with murder, there are different kinds of murder under the law. There's manslaughter, there's second-degree murder, first-degree murder. So through that, based on that, because currently in Ghana, we don't really have that system. It's murder, death. So right now, I know that we've had an engagement with the Office of the Chief Justice, and they are currently re-looking at how they can sentence persons accused based on the type of murder they've committed. I think that's a step in the right direction. I know that they've issued a memo to government on this, to the Attorney General, sorry. So we're working with them to make sure that once Ghana, takes that out of our laws, which is specifically the Criminal Offences Act and the Armed Forces Act, there are specific articles in there that need to be removed. And even that doesn't necessarily cancel completely the death penalty, because there's one more which is on treason. But most of the time, people who are incarcerated are not, they are not there for treason, they are there for murder. So, so we're looking at that. And then once we amend those acts, I think, it will be a step in the right direction.
And feeding this back into the global push for human rights, Amnesty has been here for 50 years. You've studied the trajectory around the world, and even here in our part of the world, in Ghana. Would you say that we're advancing towards that cause as a democratic country, performing well and keeping up on our human rights tenets? Are we really keeping up?
So it's, there are highs and lows in Ghana. I think every year something comes up, we go low sometimes, and then we a few steps forward, a few steps back. So right now the issue is, for example, we just launched our human rights report, state of human rights all over the world.
Right.
154 countries. It's available online. It's completely free. You can download it with PDF. And it covers Ghana, and Ghana is not looking too good because we've done things like forced evictions, because under the international law, we're not allowed to force people out of their homes. We're looking at police brutality. There have been a number of cases where you journalists have been attacked by the police wrongfully. At the end of the day, even if you've done something wrong, you are innocent until proven guilty, right? So you need to be treated as such. So you can't have police, asking you to do inhumane things whilst you are, waiting trial or being held against your will. So, the police brutality has gone up in the report. Freedom of expression is an issue. We also have LGBTI rights, people's rights, because we know that the anti-LGBTI bill
for now. It's under consideration.
Under consideration, not a law. Hopefully not. Yes, but it's under consideration. But it's going to abuse so many international laws. I know people are I don't want this. But the issue is nobody is asking you to accept, people who care for a different sexual orientation. We're just saying that, they live amongst us, leave them alone. No, don't criminalize it. Just leave them alone as they were. Nothing is happening, So I think that's the approach we should take.
Okay. You're indicating that we're not looking too good in the eyes of the world when it comes to our trajectory on the need to respect human rights.
Yes.
Out of the factors that you have pointed out, which of them stands out?
Oh, I'm not sure. I can't really pinpoint one in particular, but I think one I'm very passionate about is women's rights. For example, the Affirmative Action Bill, how many years? Like 20 years now. We keep changing the bill. This person doesn't like that on it. Oh, let's water it down. Currently, I do not know how the bill stands. I know I was just at Ministry of Gender before coming here, and they've promised to, push the bill forward. So these are things that we really need to look at. We need to look at, there are several private members' bills. I know there are about 10 or 11 which are addressing human rights issues. Right. There's one on witchcraft. We have to look at witchcraft. They say we should criminalize those who accuse other women and sometimes men of witchcraft. And then we're also looking at free medical treatment for persons who go through sexual and gender-based violence. I don't like to call them victims, But yes, so that there's a bill on that. There's a death penalty bill. There are quite a number of bills that I know currently are in Parliament and they are working on, but due to some lack of resources, they are not being able to sit on these bills. But hopefully, I can see that there's effort, but there's also pushback.
What would you say to someone who says, we'll never get there?
Oh, we'll get there.
Probably because of your bias, but
No, I like to be hopeful. I like to be hopeful. I'm very dedicated to this cause, and so are other people, thousands of people around the world. We have volunteers all throughout the 16 regions in Ghana. People message, call me when, there are human rights abuses. They're like, okay, what are we doing? What can we do, to solve this problem? So I think we all need to do our part. We need to be a bit more empathetic, and we need to report what is wrong and also see how we can right the wrongs. But most of all, I think government needs to really prioritize some of these causes. They have to take up some of these causes.
This is a thorny area that we're heading into, but we need to have the conversation. And very often, international organizations such as yours, Amnesty, and the rest around the world are criticized for not respecting the cultural relativism that comes up each time we have the conversation around the promotion or otherwise of same-sex marriages around the world.
Well, nobody's promoting it here, are we, in Ghana?
It's often come up that you're setting double standards when it comes to LGBT rights across the world.
Well, not necessarily the thing. Like I said, you know, you can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim. You don't have to accept, you know, it's fine because you have your culture and things. But Ghana is not a Christian nation. We're a secular nation. Neither is it a Muslim nation. We have our culture, which is true, but we can't turn our head. It's like the sex education. We're in denial, you know, we're preaching abstinence for senior high school, and we all know that they are doing it. It's you know, they are sexually active. And so it's like that kind of backward thinking. What can we do to help? I think we need to look in that direction more. If you're a Christian and you want to help someone who you think, due to your views, is doing the wrong thing, you can do so. But why make it a law and criminalize it? I think that's where we are wrong.
And the challenge here is you have the president stating his side of the story, indicating that this is being done through a private member's bill in Parliament, to tackle Parliament. And here we are, the Speaker of Parliament just a couple of hours ago indicating to the House of Lords, for instance, in the UK, that, well, don't threaten us with sanctions because there's no way we're backing down on this LGBT law. Well, what's your take on the stance taken by Parliament on this whole LGBT bill?
I think Parliament is made up of several MPs and they'll vote. So let's see how the vote goes. For me, I'm confident, and I know that such a law cannot be passed because I think people don't lack the knowledge of seeing the nitty-gritty, the details. And I think that's what some of the parliamentarians are not doing. They're not doing a service to our people by telling them what is really in the law, what is really in the bill that they want to pass. If you are to see what is in it, I think a lot of people...
Do you feel some Ghanaians may change their minds if they read the bill, look at what's in?
I honestly think
what's in it that, for instance, could change our minds about what's happening now?
There are some of the things that I feel are inhumane, like conversion therapy. I don't know whether you've heard of that.
Right.
But conversion therapy is forcefully making someone change by using forceful means. So sometimes it's electric shocks. You know, they used to use it back in the day during the Holocaust and when they were doing tests on people on you know, LGBTI community in the camps. They used to test them and try and get it out of them by giving them shock therapy. That's one of the things from conversion therapy. Then there's the issue about medical, the intersex, giving parents the authority to change the sex of their children. Now, the issue with that medically is that sometimes you may look like a girl, but maybe biologically, because intersex means you have two different organs. So I've heard of a case where a family thought their child was female because he looked pretty and cute, and so they decided to dress him as a female, and they decided, we want a girl, convert him to a girl, although he's intersex, right? But as he grew older, he realized he had a lot of testosterone in him, and he decided, no, I want to be a man. So this is the problem, because with children, they change with time. Their testosterone levels also change. You can ask any doctor. So based on this, you can't make that decision for them. They have to grow and get to puberty at least, and then see, you know, where they stand. Yes. So there are lots of issues in there. And then the whole going to prison for 3 years. How do you point out someone is gay? It's just like witchcraft. How do you know someone's a witch? How do you know someone is gay? Is it because of my hair? Because I've shaved my hair from on the sides. Somebody can easily say I'm a lesbian, you know. And what defines an LGBTI person? What defines it? How do I look gay? How do you look gay? If you're gay, am I going to say, oh, maybe because your lips are pink, you are gay? You know, this is the issue of the law. Now, the problem is they are going to be targeted. People are going to be like, oh, you know, men, because of the way he's walking, he's gay. Maybe he's not, you know. And I think we need to look at those issues, because that's the problem. If people are being targeted, that means there's going to be hate crime. Already, when somebody says, hey, Julo, thief, what happens? There's a mob attack.
Right.
We don't even know if the person's a thief, right? We don't even know the person has stolen. Well, guess what? That's what's going to happen.
So instant justice is what you're preventing.
Yes.
What will the country lose if we go ahead and pass this law?
A lot. I think we're definitely, I mean, the sanctions will, you know, they say don't threaten us with sanctions, but hey, it's going to happen. So I don't want to think that we would pass this law. I don't know why. I'm very hopeful that it won't go through.
You feel our MPs will support this?
I just feel it wouldn't go through. So let's see. I'm hopeful that they'll be empathetic enough to know that this is wrong. And everybody here is our brother and sister. We must treat people equally, no matter the race, sexual orientation, no matter the color of the person, no matter the religion. We all must live as one people.
We're wrapping up. The next 50 years, how is it looking like for Amnesty, and what will a country such as Ghana do to regain that trust and the good standing when it comes to the respect for human rights across the world?
It's not just about ratifying international laws, because I always say Ghana is very good at that. We have a lot of learned people. We ratify laws all the time. We're very good at that. But the implementation is the problem. We rely a lot on funding from outside. That is the main issue. I think if we cut down less of that and look more on domestic mobilization of resources, we'll be able to, you know, help our people better. So I think human rights in general, there's hope in Ghana. I don't want to dampen anyone's spirits. Yeah. And, you know, we just decriminalized attempted suicide, which is amazing for the Mental Health Authority and all the persons that, you know, are for, you know, mental health issues. So that's one step in the right direction. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that things will get better, but we as a people need to do the work.
The future looks exciting. Thank you, Ms. Batinting, for joining us. And thanks for watching this edition of Foreign Affairs. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now.